Today on Cloud S.L.A.W, we get to play with Lego. Just this morning, my wife gave me a little bit of crap for the pile of unbuilt Lego in the corner of my office. Now, you see, I love Lego. I didn't actually build this one. My son built this one. But I just don't have nearly as much time as I'd like to go ahead and build them. It was kind of one of these bad habits before we had kids. It's kind of gotten worse. Why am I talking about Lego? Because we're going to talk about AWS organizations again today. We're going to go more in depth in terms of our organizational units and our account structure. I think, as I mentioned before, back in the early days of AWS, we didn't have organizations at all. And so a lot of us realized pretty quickly the value from a security standpoint in splitting things up into different AWS accounts. It's a great security boundary. If I have an AWS account and you have an AWS account and we can't see each other's stuff, that means that I can have a bunch of AWS accounts and my development can't see production and my infrastructure can't see my DevOps or however else I want to organize these things. And that's where that Lego analogy comes in. Things in one account can't talk to things into another account unless you make a deliberate connection between them. And so this is really powerful for limiting the damage of attacks, especially what we call the blast radius, especially if somebody gets their hands on compromised credentials. So accounts provide logical separation between functions and they enforce isolation. If you have two different applications that do different things and are managed by different teams, stick them in different accounts. And then you don't have to worry about one team's administrator mucking up stuff for the other team's developers in that other account. There's a lot of benefits to multiple accounts. Another example is service limits. There's a limit to the number of resources you can have within one Amazon account. But if you have multiple accounts, that limit applies on a per account basis. It doesn't apply to everything across all of your accounts. It's also good for managing for billing and cost centers, so you can compartmentalize things. It's good for managing things like too many API calls, which is a different kind of service limit. There's just advantage over advantage over advantage by using these accounts. The problem is that it does increase your management complexity. And so a lot of the things that I'm teaching you how to set up are designed to help you be able to effectively use multiple accounts and organizational units and do so in a way that's going to be more manageable. If you cram a lot of stuff into one account, on the surface, it looks like it's going to be easier because everything can talk to everything else, but it actually makes it a lot harder because you have to manage everything. Handling things like IAM permissions on a granular level is very, very complex and difficult. If somebody needs administrative access to, say, for networking, it becomes really hard to limit them just to the one network that you want to give them access to. Some of the biggest problems, the biggest messes I've seen is when everything is in one account or a subscription in Azure or a project in Google. This is not unique to AWS. And a lot of that is especially tied to managing IAM. So we get benefits in both security and the operational standpoint. We don't deal with things like our service limits. It's easier to do charging and bill back for cost centers. And we get all the security benefits of making our security able to be more granular and better fit that account and get separation of duties. But the problem is organizing and managing all of these. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And so that's why I like my little Lego analogy. We have all the bricks. Oh God, I just broke my son's Lego. Don't tell him. I'll get that fixed. In this case, this is one he built himself. He could have put this away any way he wants, or put this together any way he wants. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you one kind of recommended architecture that I think works, but there's a lot of different ways to build these organizational structures, and you can customize them for your own environment. Those of you who are working in a large organization, I suggest you go ask your admins, take a look, see how they organize these things. My approach is based on a variation of the AWS security reference architecture and also some things that were suggested by friends. I got to thank Chris Ferris again. He's been a big help with the work, and he and I are co-collaborators at times. And he gave me some recommendations based on the architecture that he likes. So what we're going to use today is a bit of a blend of that. Let's take a quick look at the AWS security reference architecture, and then we'll switch gears. We'll talk about where we are and then what we are going to implement in today's lab. going to the whiteboard here, what I've got is the diagram of the security reference architecture. So this is published by Amazon, and they've got a lot of information on how to organize your organizational units. And you notice a couple of key components here. The first is that org management account. And remember that that one is unique in that SCPs don't work on that org management account. It's just the way that it is. This is the root of our entire organization. Then they have an organizational unit for security. And within that, and it's hard for you to go ahead and read it probably on the video today, but there's an account that they have set up for, oops, I was erasing instead of writing, for security tooling. And then there's just examples of all the different security tools they've got in that particular account. We're not going to get to that level today. Then there's a log archive account, and pay attention, we're going to get back to that log archive account. Then they have an infrastructure organizational unit. This is for things like your shared networking, which is that account, and then other shared services in that account. And we're going to build that out over time, and the version we're going to use is going to be a little bit different. And then the other key one is this workloads. And so the workloads organization unit is where all the accounts that you actually run your application workloads in, both development and production, tend to appear in the workloads account. Now let's look at where we are today. So we'll just scan over here. And what we have is, this is what we've built out. So we have our management account. We have our security audit account, and that is inside our security organizational unit. Pretty straightforward. Now, this is a really good start, but it's not exactly everything that we... Sorry, accidental pause there. I have some general rules of thumb that I use when I'm basically setting my rules around how I want to organize my organizational units for governance, security, and operations. So at a minimum, I like to have OUs for governance or security. There's different names. Chris prefers governance. I tend to use security. There's no wrong way as long as you're doing the right things in those right organizational units. Then one for infrastructure. Some people call that operation, and one for workloads. So if you go back to that reference account that we did over here from Amazon, that's how they organize things. But I tend to add more. I like to have a place to handle special cases like incident response. Chris recommended one for mergers and acquisitions, accounts you're going to go ahead and deprovision, or accounts that you're just starting to build at the beginning. So the rule is you really want to think about when you're building these separation of functions. Always have it in your head. Who needs to use an account or things within an organizational unit? And what does that account need to do? I'm a fan of more accounts rather than fewer accounts. And that's just because of practical experience has shown me the more you cram into one account, the harder it can be to do certain things. But there are very legitimate cases where you want to intermingle different workloads of different security contexts. And we'll get to that as we go deeper into this topic. I generally follow a few guidelines. Now, what those guidelines are is the first is that one of our more powerful tools is those service control policies. And because those can apply at an organizational unit level, I'll generally use that to define aspects of my hierarchy. So if I want different ones for development and different ones for production, I may organize across prod and non-prod, standard terms that people tend to use, as opposed to organizing things by business units. And we're going to, again, it makes it a lot easier once I draw all of those out. But in that case, you would have a different OU for your production and your non-production, and you could use different service control policies at that level. The other thing is if things are of a different security context. So if something has a lot of compliance requirements, you're probably going to want that at least in its own account, if not its own organizational unit. Now, if you have another one hosting pictures of your cats, and my cat's kind of a jerk, you may want to, you don't want that in the same account as your compliance account. Maybe you split that out into another account. So security context is another thing that we can use, and that does actually tend to correlate a lot back to those service control policies. And the next one is a bit of an organizational one. If application stacks are managed by different teams, then I try to put them in different accounts. Makes my identity and access management easier to manage because I don't have to give anyone from team A access to any of the accounts managed by team B. Those of you in small environments, of course, this isn't quite as much of an issue, but as you grow into larger and larger deployments, it does really become a pretty big and complex issue, and it makes it a lot easier if you can compartmentalize like that. Another one is cost centers as well, because it's really easy to pull out cost per AWS account in the billing console. It's really hard if you have multiple teams sharing an account and you start having to try to use things like tags and stuff to figure out who's spending too much money. And then I think this is last on my list. If two applications need to talk to each other and they're changing a lot of data, it may make sense to put them in the same account, but we're going to talk about that a lot more when we start getting into some of our network architecture decisions. And to be honest, the data transfer and things of different security contexts that still have some shared stuff where they need to talk to each other, that's like always kind of, in my experience, some of the hardest decisions to make about when you can split things out and when you need to have them share the same account. That covers kind of the basics of it. Again, the real big security control that ties to this structure in your organizational units are those service control policies. And so that's why that's my guide to the top line account hierarchy before I start dealing with everything else. All right. With that, let's jump into the lab and let's take a look at what we're going to build out today. So I'm going to describe it and switch over to this diagram here and kind of walk through. And you'll see that, wow, we have expanded things out. Let me zoom out. And we're going to have a bunch more organizational units. Had to actually let that catch up that we're putting in place. So we are going from here to here, this much more complicated architecture. It's not that bad. These are going to be the top level organizational units, the top level folders that we're going to use. And today, what we have is our security OU and our security audit account. We are going to create accounts for our log archive, security operations, and IAM. Now, there's going to be a bit of confusion here, and we're actually not going to fully create those. We're going to just create these two. It's getting a little ahead of myself because what I named security audit probably should have been named log archive, and they have different functions that we'll get into as we do it. So next week, we're actually going to learn how to change the name of one of the accounts, and we're going to be able to swap those into place. The next is the infrastructure OU, and we're going to create that, which is going to be where we're going to later run some of our shared infrastructure operations pieces. For this training and the history of this training, we're not going to probably do a lot there, but it's very commonly seen. So we're going to go ahead and get that set up. And then workloads. And workloads is where we're going to deploy our application stacks. We're going to spend a lot of time using that one down the road. Again, today we're just going to go ahead and create these empty without anything in them, except for this stack of accounts right over here. I'm going to give you a brief description of what all of these are as we verbally right now, but I also recommend in this case, you go ahead and check out the blog post where I've written all of this out and where I've described it out. That's going to be a lot more useful than just watching this video. So infrastructure is where we run our infrastructure shared services. You might have a shared networking account, all sorts of shared services running there. Workloads is where we run our application stacks. Then we get to our exceptions OU. That's going to be one without any current service control policies on it, and we're going to leave it empty. That's when I have special little children that aren't going to fit the rules of anywhere else, I'm going to go ahead and put them in that exceptions OU. Sandbox. This is actually one of the most important ones that we need because the sandbox OU is the one where we allow developers a lot of freedom to do a lot of things, and many of the rules don't apply. We just don't let them put anything production in those sandboxes. But that's the way that they are going to learn how to use different new kinds of tools and technologies from the cloud provider and figure out how to put things together in a more manual way that's not like the more DevOpsy stuff that's going to be our true development environments, which are going to be run over there up in our workloads OU. Then we have a special one that's onboarding, and we're probably, I don't know, I might come up with a lab for this one at some point. So the onboarding is for mergers and acquisitions activity. That's going to be the ones that we inherit accounts from someplace else. We're going to move them in there. We're going to tune the service control policies. And again, the goal is eventually to promote them up and send them over to the workloads OU. We also are going to have a nursery OU. This is one that we use for creating new accounts. When we first provision an account with automation, we tend to need more permissions than when we hand that off to the team that's actually going to use that account. It's going to be a fully automated process. We're not going to do that by hand, but that nursery has less restrictive service control policies to get everything hooked in and wired the way we want it to be. And then, as with the others, you guessed it, that gets promoted over to workloads when we're done. Suspended OUs are pretty fun. This is where you put a deny all policy on top. And if you're getting ready to deprovision an account, this is great because you move it into suspended, you see what breaks and who screams about it, and then you know who actually has responsibility for that account that was ignoring all your emails. And then you can flip it back out and give them time to go ahead and fix stuff. But that's for accounts that you want to lock everything down on. And then we have our incident response OU, which is my favorite. It's for all that SecOpsy stuff. We're going to have some different service control policies on the incident response OU that will do things like block activities, except unless it's one of our incident responders, for example. That's a quick description of all the ones we're going to do. The lab's going to be a little bit repetitious. We'll go through. I'm going to show you how to create things. I'm not going to show you the step-by-step to create every one of these. I'm going to show you how to do one of each, and I'm going to have you create all of the individual pieces as we go through it. All right, so let's go ahead, get logged into our accounts, go into the Organizations tab, and get started. Quick reminder, we want to be logging in from now on with our IAM Identity Center. So I'm going to go ahead in IAM Identity Center, and I'll pause here as I do my login process. I'm logged in, and I want to start by going to my management account. And if you recall, I called mine Cloud.S.L.A.W. So we'll click on there, and we'll do administrator access because that's the only role that we've set up. Once I'm in this management account, it looks like I have an extra window open there. Close that tab. I'm going to double check administrator access or mogul. Click on that upper right corner, and we'll go to organizations. I'm going to start by creating the organizational units, and then we'll come back. So we have security, which we already created. And now I need to go ahead and create additional organizational units. I have to click on root first, then actions, then create new. Then I give it my organizational unit name. We'll start with infrastructure. Boom. Okay, it's just that fast. Now I want you to go to the blog post associated with this particular lesson and pull out the list of the organizational units, or just scrub back the video and you can see them all listed out. I'm going to go on pause as I type in all of those. So this is going to be a short video, but there's going to be about 5 minutes of work as I pull all of those. Okay, maybe 3 minutes of work as I pull all of those and create those OUs. So everybody else, go ahead and do that. Do not create the accounts yet. We will come back to the accounts in just a moment. When you're all done, this is what it should look like. Exceptions, incident response, infrastructure, nursery, onboarding, sandbox, security, suspended, and workloads with our management account sitting here on the outside. Some people, again, this is one of the recommendations from Chris, he puts his management account inside a governance OU with also the security tooling. I tend to keep it out because service control policies don't apply to that. It's not a big deal. We also can change that pretty easily down the road. Now we're going to create a couple accounts. If we click on security, the down arrow there, we have our security audit account. Now remember, I said there's a problem with the naming of this. We are not going to create the log archive today. We will do that next week when I teach you how to actually change the name of security archive or security audit to log archive. But we still need to create 2 more accounts today that we're going to work with. It's going to be security operations and identity and access management. And as we create them, I'll explain what I use those for. Let's start with IAM. So we're going to do create an AWS account. We're going to give it the name IAM. And remember our plus addressing. So it's going to be or plus cloud/slaw IAM at securosis.com. And you can just probably get away with using IAM if you're on your own Gmail or something. I have a lot of different accounts in different environments, so that's why I've added that cloud/slaw piece to mine. We're going to leave the IAM role name of organization account access role. Remember, that's our standard. We're not going to change that. But keep in mind, we may want to restrict that, and we'll get to that in a bit. Create AWS account. Now, the reason we have a separate IAM account is we set up Identity Center in our management account, but we don't want to have administrators going in there to create the users, the groups, and the permission sets that are going to be expanded out to the rest of the organization. In a future lab, we're going to enable something called delegated administration, which means we'll actually run IAM out of that IAM account, and it's going to hook into our organization level IAM Identity Center. So that's how we can run these centralized things from other accounts. They're still centralized, but we've delegated the administration of that to another account. And a reason that we break IAM into its own category is in a lot of places that I've gone, operations sometimes has need to directly involve themselves in IAM. And in fact, it's not unusual for me to go into an organization and see that in infrastructure or operations instead of security. Me, I'm a security guy. It's identity and access management. I think security needs to own that function. I've seen some very major breaches because operations owned it and security didn't own it. So we are going to put that in security, but understand you may see that in other places. The next one we're going to set up is our security operations. And that's where we're going to run some of our security tooling that actually can go in and make changes into accounts. We're not close to even running those yet. We'll get to that probably in about 2 months. I've got some sample and demonstration tools that we can run, but I like having security operations is the read and write account that you can go into that we restrict access to because that can make changes in environments. And you only generally want to use that when you need to run a security tool that's not a monitoring tool, and almost always that's pretty limited to incident response scenarios. We will also set up the actual security audit account, and the security audit account is our read-only account that we can use when we need to look at different kinds of logs and as well as looking at results from different kinds of scanning tools. So that's going to be the key difference is the security operations is going to be an account that can make changes, and security audit is an account that can only have read-only access. Contact slipped. Sorry if I'm blinking too much. Okay, so let's add that second account now, which is going to be our security operations. And then I'm going to go our mogul plus cloud/slaw secops at securosis.com. Organization account access role, scroll down, create AWS account. We're all set. Now those accounts, let's double check and see where they are. Where are they? I don't see those accounts here. We need to go ahead and do our list, and you can see that the accounts here, IAM and security operations, need to be moved. So we're going to go account, AWS account, move. And then we click and go to security, move AWS accounts. And now when I click on security, everything should be updated and we have all of our accounts right where we want them to be. So these three, next week we're going to add a fourth, and we're also going to change the name. The week after, or within the next couple of weeks after, we're going to start customizing our service control policies a little bit. So there's a whole lot of work to do still. This is just the skeleton framework to get us started. So we put the Legos in, but we haven't put the stickers on the Legos, or we haven't put the minifigs in. I don't know. My analogy falls apart here, but we're done with this week's lab. Nice, quick, easy setup. We have our hierarchy set out, and we're going to be able to now build things out. And I don't know if there's going to be an end to cloud/slaw, but by the end of the year, at least, we're going to have like a really robust enterprise looking architecture and hierarchy. Have a great week.